I used to think love could hold a house together. Turns out, silence does it better, until the night it finally cracks. The rain had been falling since morning, steady and thin, tapping the kitchen window of the house I'd worked half my life to keep. By evening, the table was set for 4. Candles, linen napkins, the roast I'd marinated before sunrise. Noah said he wanted a family dinner. He hadn't used that phrase in years, and something in me wanted to believe it meant what it used to. Sabrina arrived first, hair perfect, voice warm enough to melt wax. She carried a bottle of wine she'd bought on credit and an attitude that always filled the room before she did. When Noah followed, he kissed her cheek, not mine, then sank into his chair and started scrolling through his phone. I told myself to breathe, to stay invisible the way I'd learned to be. Then, halfway through the meal, it happened. Sabrina laughed at something Noah said, looked around the table, and added, "Honestly, Elaine keeps this place afloat, like our resident home manager." It was said lightly, almost playfully, but everyone laughed, including my son. The sound didn't hurt all at once. It spread, like cold water seeping through fabric, slow and unstoppable. I kept smiling, though my hands trembled as I reached for the wine bottle. I poured for them, not for myself. When the laughter faded, the only thing I could hear was the rain. That's when I realized I was done. After dessert, I cleared the plates, stacked them in the sink, and wiped the table clean. Every crumb, every trace of what used to be us. They went to the living room to watch a show. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed I'd bought when Noah was 10. The house felt enormous, hollow, echoing with voices that no longer belonged to me. I thought about every bill I'd paid, every late night I'd worked, every time I'd said, of course, sweetheart, when I wanted to scream. And then I stood, opened the closet, and took the small suitcase from the top shelf. No hesitation, just quiet clarity. I didn't pack much, some clothes, my worn-out notebook, a photograph of Noah as a boy. The rest could stay. They already acted as if it was theirs. Let it be. When I stepped into the hallway, I could hear Sabrina's laughter again. I didn't hate her for it. I just felt outside of it, like a ghost haunting my own home. At the door, I paused. My hand rested on the doorknob, the same one I'd polished every spring. Then I whispered, almost to the house itself, "You kept me long enough." The rain hadn't stopped. It wrapped around me as I walked to the car, suitcase in hand. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, as if leaving a sleeping child behind. The headlights cut through the wet dark, and in the rearview mirror I saw the porch light still on. Noah hadn't noticed I was gone yet. He wouldn't, not for hours, maybe days. For the first time in decades, I didn't know where I was going. But I knew exactly where I wasn't staying. The wipers moved back and forth, steady as a heartbeat, and under their rhythm, something inside me whispered, "This is how freedom sounds." The apartment wasn't really mine. It used to belong to my Aunt June, a quiet woman who collected teacups and secrets. After she passed, no one wanted the place. It sat above an old antique store on the edge of Willow Creek, the kind of neighborhood that always smelled like rain and cedar. When I opened the door that first night, the air was heavy with dust and memory. The wallpaper had peeled in places, and the floor creaked like it was remembering too much. But it was silent, and that was enough. I set my suitcase on the counter and stood there, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. I didn't do either. I just listened to the groan of the heater, to my own breathing, to the sound of a woman who had finally stopped pretending. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea using a mismatched mug June had left behind. I drank it by the window, watching the street below wake up. Delivery trucks, school buses, people who still had somewhere to be. I didn't envy them. I just watched, like someone who had stepped out of her own life and didn't yet know how to step back in. Days passed quietly. I lived on simple things: bread, fruit, instant soup. I slept on a sofa because the bed frame in the next room was broken. I wrote in my old notebook at night, the one I'd packed without thinking. Not letters, not even memories, Just words, raw and uneven, like wounds that hadn't healed right. I thought Noah might call. He didn't. The silence between us grew so large I could almost hear it. One afternoon, while searching for a light bulb in the small storage closet, I found a metal tin tucked behind a box of old sewing patterns. It was rusted, heavy, sealed tight with tape yellowed from time. June's handwriting covered the lid. For Elaine, when she's ready. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Then I sat on the floor, the tin in my lap, my heart beating too fast for someone my age. Inside, there were letters, dozens of them, stacked neatly with fragile envelopes that smelled faintly of lavender. On top, one addressed to me, dated 30 years ago. If you're reading this, it means you came back. And I'm sorry for the truth I never had the courage to tell you. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the pages. June wrote about the night I gave birth, how she was working at the hospital then, how there had been confusion with the newborn tags, room switch, a nurse reassigned mid-shift. She said she had always suspected something went wrong, that 2 families left that night with the wrong children. By the time I tried to ask questions, it was too late. She wrote, the babies were already home. Years later, I came across a bundle of internal hospital correspondence, quiet letters that should have been lost but weren't. That's when I knew I wasn't wrong. I read it again and again until the words blurred. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then something strange happened. The world didn't spin and I didn't collapse. Instead, I felt still. It wasn't relief or grief. It was clarity, quiet, undeniable clarity. Because for years I had felt something I couldn't name. A distance in Noah I couldn't explain. A coldness that made me question if I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe something inside him had always known he was elsewhere. At the bottom of the tin, I found a photograph. A newborn wrapped in a striped hospital blanket. The name scribbled underneath, Caleb Morgan. I didn't know who he was then, but I knew this. My entire life had just tilted, and nothing would ever stand quite straight again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, reading June's letter under the flickering light of an old lamp. The rain outside didn't stop for hours. Neither did I. By dawn, I whispered to the empty room. If I lost one life, maybe I can still find another. And for the first time, that thought didn't sound impossible. A week after I found the letter, I drove into the center of Willow Creek for the first time in months. The town had changed, new cafes, bright murals, the constant hum of life I used to think I was part of. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. A small storefront on the corner of Maple and Fifth. A sign above the door in gold lettering, the Lantern House. The windows were full of books, some new, some old. Some that looked as if they'd survived other lives before this one. And there, behind the counter, was a man arranging a stack of poetry collections. Mid-30s, perhaps. Calm, composed. He had the kind of face that looked like it had learned gentleness through pain. The name tag read, Caleb. For a long time, I just stood across the street, half hidden under my umbrella, watching him move. I didn't need proof. I knew. The name, the age, the quiet in his eyes, it all fit. This was the child June had written about, the one I never held. The first day, I watched from the sidewalk. The second day, I bought a book I didn't plan to read. By the third, I'd memorized the way he smiled at customers. Patient, genuine, never rushed. It hurt, but it was a good kind of hurt. The kind that reminds you your heart still works. Sometimes he would glance up and catch my gaze through the glass, just for a second. He'd nod politely, that simple gesture that can mean 100 things. I'd nod back, pretending to be another stranger passing through. At night, I wrote everything down in a new notebook. Not feelings, facts. Dates, names, what he wore, what music played in the shop. It wasn't obsession. It was witnessing. Proof that he was real. Meanwhile, I started checking on Noah and Sabrina from a distance, too. Their bright online life was fading. Posts turned sporadic. The motivational quotes stopped coming. Rumors spread that Sabrina's coaching business was mostly unpaid collaborations and borrowed luxury. Their mortgage was months behind. The empire of filters was crumbling, quietly, perfectly. I didn't smile when I learned it. I just wrote it down, like closing a book I'd read too many times. Caleb's life, on the other hand, was simple. He lived in a small house by the river, organized weekly reading circles, volunteered at the community library. There was light around him, the kind that doesn't shout but stays. And when I saw that, something inside me softened. Not jealousy, not grief, just recognition. Once, as I stood outside pretending to scroll through my phone, he came out to sweep the sidewalk. He smiled. "Rain again," he said. His voice, steady, kind, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. "Yes," I answered. "Willow Creek doesn't know how to stop." He laughed softly. "Maybe that's why we stay." We talked for less than a minute, but when I walked away, I realized I hadn't felt that alive in years. That night, I didn't write about Noah. I didn't write about the past. I wrote about the way Caleb's voice sounded over the rain. And for the first time, the page didn't feel like a confession. It felt like a beginning. I started to walk differently after that. Straighter, quieter. People on the street began to look me in the eye again. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the story wasn't about revenge or even discovery. It was about return. I never planned revenge. I planned balance. For so long I'd carried everyone else's weight. Bills, birthdays, broken promises. Now, I began to carry only my own. It started with a call to a lawyer. Her name was Rachel Vaughn, a calm woman who listened more than she spoke. When I explained that the house was still in my name, she nodded slowly, like she'd heard the story before, the woman who gave too much, and the world that took it. "If you want the property back, Mrs. Harper," she said, "you have every legal right." "I don't want it back," I answered. "I just want it clean." The paperwork took 3 days. By the 4th, the house was officially being prepared for sale. Noah and Sabrina would receive the notice soon. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like a boat finally correcting its course. That night, I went back to the Lantern house. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered. Caleb looked up from behind the counter. "Back again?" he asked, smiling. "I guess I like the quiet here." "Then you're in the right place," he said. He was sorting through a box of used paperbacks, each with a name scrawled on the inside cover. When he handed me one, a worn copy of The Sound of Rain, I noticed his hands. They were steady like his voice, the kind of hands that fixed rather than broke. We talked a little. Books, weather, the stubborn way the town refused to modernize. Nothing personal. But when I left, he said, "You remind me of someone." "Can't place who." I smiled. "Maybe someone you used to know." "Maybe," he said softly. I walked home under the same drizzle that had followed me since the night I left. Only now it didn't feel heavy. It felt like cleansing. Days passed, then a week. When the notice finally went out to Noah and Sabrina, I was sitting in the cafe across from the courthouse, stirring honey into my tea. My phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. I turned it over, let it ring. By evening there was an email. "Mom, what are you doing? Please call me. Sabrina's panicking." I closed it. I didn't delete it. I just left it there, unopened like a memory I'd already read. Rachel called to confirm the listing went through. "You'll get the full profit," she said. "I don't need all of it," I told her. "We'll talk about that later." The next morning, Sabrina left me a voicemail. Her voice was sharp around the edges, like glass about to break. "Elaine, we need to talk. This whole thing, it's a misunderstanding. Noah says you're going through something. We're just trying to help." Help. The word almost made me laugh. That evening, I walked by the Lantern house again. The windows glowed golden in the rain. Inside, Caleb was rearranging the display. He looked up, saw me, waved. I hesitated, then stepped in. "You're becoming a regular," he said. "Maybe I just like the way it feels in here." "How's that?" "Honest," I said. He tilted his head, thoughtful. That's rare, he murmured. We sat for a while, talking about nothing and everything, the price of paper, the sound of storms, how sometimes silence can be louder than noise. When I left, I realized the shaking in my hands was gone. At home, I opened my notebook, the second one, the factual one, and drew a small line under the date. The line meant closure. It meant a woman once used as furniture had finally stood up from the table. Outside, the rain slowed. Inside, for the first time in years, I felt warm. It took me almost 3 days to decide how to tell him. No, I mean, the son I raised, the boy who once held my hand so tightly in parking lots and now barely remembered I existed. I practiced the words in my head, at night, in the mirror, even at the grocery store aisle, whispering into the hum of refrigerators. There was a mistake. You weren't born to me. You're still my son, but not by blood. Every version sounded wrong, cruel, or too soft to matter, but I couldn't keep the truth buried any longer. He showed up before I was ready. It was a Thursday afternoon. I heard the knock before I saw him. 3 hesitant taps, like a child asking permission. Through the peephole, he looked smaller somehow, unshaven, tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from work, but from watching everything you built fall apart. I opened the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "come in." He stood in the middle of the room, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes searching the walls like he was afraid to meet mine. Finally, he asked, "Why are you doing this? Selling the house, ignoring us, what's going on?" I took a slow breath. "This isn't about you, Noah. It's about me." He frowned. "You don't need to prove a point." "I'm not proving anything. I'm reclaiming what's mine." The silence between us thickened. Then I said it, the thing I'd rehearsed 100 times and still wasn't ready for. "Noah, the records say you arrived to me by mistake, not by blood." He blinked, confused. "What?" I handed him the folder Aunt June left, the letter, the hospital documents, the DNA report. He sat down, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. His lips moved as he read, though no sound came out. When he finished, he looked up, pale as paper. "This is insane," he said. "It's true." "So who am I then?" "You're Noah Harper. You were raised by me. You had a home, love, everything I could give. That hasn't changed." He stared at me for a long time, like he was trying to find his reflection in my face. Finally, his voice broke. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing everything?" "Because for once," I said softly, "you're seeing what it's like when I stop giving it all away." He lowered his head. I didn't feel anger. I felt peace, the quiet kind that comes after a long storm. Before he left, he whispered, "Can we fix this?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but it's not my job to try anymore." I closed the door gently behind him, the way I had that first night when I left the house. Not with rage, but with certainty. That same evening, I drove to the Lantern house. The lights were still on. Caleb was there, alone, placing new arrivals on the shelf. When he saw me, he smiled. "You're here late." "I needed to talk," I said. He nodded, motioned toward the small break room. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. I took out the same folder and placed it on the table between us. He looked from me to it, uncertain. "What's this?" "Something you should know." He opened it. "Read the first page." Then the second. Then stopped halfway through the letter, eyes wide. His lips parted, but no words came. Finally, he whispered, "You think I'm—" "I don't think," I said. "I know." The room went quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. He sat back slowly, holding the papers as if they might dissolve. "I have parents," he said, voice trembling. "I know. I'm not here to take that from you." "Then why tell me?" "Because silence kept me trapped my whole life, and I won't live inside it anymore." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I don't know what to feel." "You don't have to know," I said. "Just don't run from it." We sat like that for a long time, two strangers linked by a single thread neither of us had chosen. Finally, he said, quietly, "You should stay for a while. Have some tea." I smiled through the tears that finally came. "I'd like that." We didn't talk about the past again that night. We talked about books and rain and how peace can sound a lot like silence. And when I left, I realized something. Truth doesn't destroy you. It frees the part of you that's been waiting to live. Autumn came early that year. The air smelled like wet leaves and with smoke, and Willow Creek looked softer, gentler, like the world had forgiven itself a little. By then, the house had sold. Rachel called to confirm the closing date, and I signed the final papers with a steady hand. The profit was more than I expected. Half of it I sent to a women's foundation downtown, one that helped women starting over after being silenced or discarded. It felt right, like putting my story to work. Noah and Sabrina moved out quietly. There were no scenes, no shouting. I drove past one afternoon and saw them loading boxes into a borrowed truck. Sabrina wore sunglasses, though the day was cloudy. Noah looked older, like he'd aged 10 years in one summer. I didn't stop. I just watched, the way you watch the tide pull away from the shore. Sad but natural. Some endings don't need witnesses, only distance. Meanwhile, my visits to the Lantern House became routine. Not planned, just natural. Caleb would wave when I came in, sometimes hand me a cup of tea before I asked. We talked about ordinary things, new shipments, the book club, how the town smelled different after rain. He never called me Mom. He didn't have to. There was a quiet understanding between us, something unnamed but steady. One morning he called. His voice was lighter than usual. "Can you stop by tomorrow? I want to show you something." When I arrived, the shop lights were already on. Caleb stood near the back wall, where a new wooden sign had been hung over an arched doorway. It read, "The Quiet Room." He turned to me, smiling. "It's a new section, a space for reading, small gatherings, people who need calm." I wanted it to feel like belonging. He reached into his pocket and handed me a small brass key. "And you want me to open it?" I asked. "Not just open it," he said. "I want you to have it." I didn't move at first. The key was warm in my hand, heavy with meaning I couldn't put into words. "You don't have to do this," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but I want to. You've spent enough of your life giving away pieces of yourself. Maybe it's time someone gave something back." When I turned the key in the lock, the door opened into a small, sunlit room. Soft chairs, a rug patterned like waves, shelves already half filled with books. The scent of paper and pine filled the air. In the corner sat a table with 2 teacups and a single vase of fresh flowers. Simple, peaceful, mine. I stood there for a long moment, taking it in. Then I said quietly, "You didn't name it after me." He smiled. "I didn't have to." That evening, I went back to my apartment and opened my old notebook. There was one blank page left. I wrote slowly, letting every word breathe. I used to be a woman who gave until she disappeared. Then I learned that silence isn't emptiness. It's strength waiting to speak. Today, I unlocked a door, and behind it I found myself. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and let the quiet settle around me like a soft blanket. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, familiar, unafraid. For the first time, I didn't listen for someone else's footsteps. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It belonged to me, and somewhere across town, a small brass key glimmered under a sign that said "The Quiet Room," a reminder that even after a life of loss, you can still find a door that opens toward peace.